Well, hello everybody and welcome to another session with Exec. Really pleased you decided to join us. Today we're going to be talking about all kinds of things around the topic of AI, and with that, really pleased to have with us our guest speaker, Scott Hutchins, who's the VP of AI and Integrations at 4Me. Scott, welcome. If you'd be great if you could just give us a quick introduction to you, and then we'll hit you with a hard round of questioning, if that's okay.
That is perfect. And hey, great to be chatting with you guys again. Yeah, my name is Scott Hutchins. I'm the VP of Engineering at 4Me. I focus on AI and integrations, which is pretty cool because they're relevant to me in the way that they come together. Basically, AI has to have a lot of data to make relevant decisions, and as well to have agency to push whatever preferences or whatever inferences are generated for automations to maybe push that out and make it real in the world through integrations. So I've been at 4Me for about 6 months now. Before that, I spent 4 years at User Testing, which is a customer experience management platform. And I joined them when I sold my natural language processing startup to them, and then stayed on to kind of build out the data platform teams as well as the AI and machine learning teams. So really excited to have joined 4Me because it seems like a space that's really ripe for AI automation. And kind of when I look at it, it seems like it's almost in some ways easier to get started there just based on how the data is structured, how teams are already using that. So excited to be chatting with you about how we're using AI in this space.
Brilliant. Thanks, Scott.
So, Scott, thank you for that. It's fantastic to have you with us. So, a first question to kind of kick us off. So, there is lots of hyperbole about AI. Generally, you can't, you can't go to the supermarket without seeing somebody talking about AI capability. But within the ITSM and enterprise service management landscape, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, I think, to separate the hyperbole from the reality. So I guess a twofold question, right? The first bit is, what's your view, right, of where we are today? But also, perhaps give our listeners a bit of an understanding of why we think AI is so relevant to the ITSM, ESM world at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's one we've grappled with internally too, because I think two things are true at the same time, which people wouldn't expect to be true at the same time. One is that AI is at pure hype phase. So everyone is talking about how it's going to change everything, and they haven't seen it happen yet in the way that they would have expected. Let's just say that's the caveat there. And the other side of it is they do believe that AI will likely transform the way that they're working within ITSM and ESM. So both those are true, which leaves us at kind of this paradoxical space of, okay, we believe it's hype, but we also believe it's going to change everything. And I think the framing of that is, at least in our view, is I think people assume that AI would be competing with the humans. And so it's AI has not taken on over jobs in the way that might have been feared and might have been kind of communicated by the media. But teams are leveraging AI to do all sorts of different things. So I think it's actually starting to kind of bleed into the space in a very meaningful way, but just not in that shock and awe way of 20% headcount reductions across the board because AI is doing these specific jobs. There's kind of more of this ecosystem at play of teams have to learn how to leverage AI in meaningful ways. So it's kind of led to this pretty exciting space in that teams have to figure out how do they incorporate this into their own ecosystem of products and solutions and processes, which has led for a lot of interesting implementations. And we haven't seen that yet converge into here is the universal best practice. So there might not even be a universal best practice. It might be in some ways dependent on how an organization is structured and the types of services it's looking to deliver.
It must be terribly exciting for someone like yourself, right? Because you've got this, as you say, this sort of, this sort of not quite joining in the middle thing where you've got this hope and expectation, right, that AI is going to really dramatically improve service management. And so that gives you lots of headroom, doesn't it? You're not there It gives you lots of headroom to kind of really go and explore things. I guess maybe what's quite interesting, and given what you said, would be to think about this from the perspective of the consuming organization. So, somebody goes out, they buy for me, they are looking for AI capability to improve the way in which they consume that for me technology platform. What kind of business benefit do you think they should be looking for or expecting to get, if not today, but in the next maybe 12, 18 months, something like that? Because I guess that is as important, isn't it, in terms of framing this conversation? It's not just about what can we do with AI, but actually what's consumable by an organization, and therefore what benefit can they get?
Yeah. I think that touches on the key of the problem with that last paradox that we were talking about, of the framing of how do you measure the success of it, because people still believe that AI is going to have this meaningful impact. But again, even in my own example, I gave like a KPI of, and obviously the way that I'll measure this is headcount reduction. And that hasn't really been seen. And I think that that's a good thing, because there's a lot that AI can do very well. But if you put them in a head-to-head battle where the battlefield was where humans normally operate, I think it would lose in most cases. And you even hear, you'll hear Sam Altman talk about that, with how embarrassing, the current performance of GPT-4 is, which is shocking given how far it's made us come. And where he believes that it's going to go next. And you hear that across the entire AI space. So I think the key metrics you have to look at then aren't just in terms of headcount reduction. It's, does it create a better experience? Does it create these efficiencies? And as well, does it allow your organization to operate in the way that it would likely want to operate? And that's where we see it when we work with partners all the time. Is partners really have that understanding of, here's how a business wants to operate. Here's why it has these implicit rules of how it operates in the way it does, which isn't often written down, which is the problem we see sometimes in AI implementations. Is AI may not have that historical business logic for, here's why things operate the way they do. So that's kind of what we're seeing a lot right now, is that when you're looking at those metrics, there isn't yet that universal. And that's the great thing for us, is when we work with partners, the partners know how to measure those metrics, and whether it's experience improvements, whether it's just efficiency, so that some of the dirt shoveling is done by AI. So it's not doing the sexiest of work, but it's doing meaningful work that allows for more tickets to be resolved, more things to be handled more quickly, or as well for more strategic thought to be applied by teams, instead of kind of just doing the operational details of what I would call kind of dirt shoveling.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So I'm just going to reverse my thought train a little bit. So when we go out at Accession and we talk to customers about the opportunity to work with them around service management improvements, we talk about improving customer experience, how people consume those technology services. We talk about improving business agility, the ability to change your organization quickly but manage risk. We talk about productivity. We talk about leveraging the platform to extend away from just IT right out to the broader business. Actually, that's kind of what you've just said, isn't it? So rather than looking at this, as you can say, kind of big bang, AI is here, it's all changed. Actually, perhaps we're better off looking at the incremental changes to the way in which your service management technology should be improving your business. And how do we focus on those areas and gradually improve those, so that your customers get a better experience, so that you can change more quickly, or whatever it is.
And just to add to that as well, I mean, we're here now. This is the dawn of AI, and people are starting to adopt it, albeit perhaps slowly. And I think to the point you made, Scott, about there's uncertainty about where it's going to add, let's say, significant benefit or marginal benefits. Are you finding then, perhaps with conversations with partners, customers, and the like, that they sort of say, well, here's the problem we want to solve. Here's what we want to solve for X. How can AI help us achieve that? And we talk about customer experience, and it could well be that instead of waiting 3 days to be fulfilled for whatever that fulfillment is, AI can help reduce that to 2 days, or pick another example.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the ways I start this though, that's kind of interesting for me is when I start talking about our AI roadmap and what we're doing next, I focus on we've been using AI in the product for translation for 2, 3, maybe it's even 4 years at this point in time. So AI has been around, but I think most people have started to really pay attention to it when it comes to these large language models. So I think there is kind of a difference between these classifiers, transformers that we've historically used, because those were relatively well understood. You might say that that kind of is more of a statistical approach where people didn't think too much about using correlations to make inferences or predictions moving forward. Myself included, large language models kind of came as a shock that it seemed like they kind of came out of nowhere and created this new space. So to your point though, how do you measure that? I think it depends on where an organization is at in their maturity curve. So one of the ways that I get most excited about is implementation and onboarding. So implementation and onboarding tends to be something that's really challenging because you have to train the trainers, then onboard the teams and kind of learn the personas of each individual end user who's leveraging the platform. So AI is something that should be able to reinforce those things. And as well, it's the same thing for older businesses that have something already in place, but have turnover in the employee base. How can you turn the knowledge from your historical employees that really understood the job well to make these new employees be able to perform to the same level of efficiency in a much faster ramp time? So I think there's all these different kind of metrics you could measure of how long does it take to ramp. But I think at the end of the day, the only thing that will matter is revenue. So I think everything else is kind of a leading indicator getting to revenue. But I think that those are meaningful leading indicators to see how you're performing across all those. But I mean, ultimately, it can't just be experiences are better or it helps kind of at the peripheries. I think we are going to see that. I talk about this quite a lot. Boards, I think in 2021, 2022, wanted to see that there was some sort of strategy. Maybe in the beginning of 2023, it was good enough to say, here are the different spikes or kind of where we're jumping into it. In 2024, and I think 2025, it's going to be measured in terms of revenue. And that's what makes it kind of challenging for, as we talk about service delivery and ITSM and ESM is they're going to have to show direct correlations and not just revenue performance, potentially in a downward facing market that makes it more challenging to show revenue successes. So I think that's where the tools that you use will have to help you communicate that story and potentially even use AI to help you communicate that story of how AI is creating benefits for you.
Hey, Chat GPT, can you write to my CFO and explain what the revenue number's gone up? It's quite interesting though. The challenge then that a CIO or a CTO has, because you've got something that is potentially quite intangible, right, in terms of what those benefits are. And actually, the really hard question that you've just described is, yeah, but where's the revenue increase? Where's the bottom line impact, right, on this investment? So if you take for me as an example, right? So in your thinking, Scott, how are you trying to help your customer CIO, CTO link those two things together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we wanted to start with a roadmap that's easy to understand. So kind of knowing that there is so much hype out there and kind of having been from a VC backed world where you do get praised and awarded by creating additional hype like that. That's what's most interesting. We actually know that, CIOs and CTOs often have to clean up the hype mess. So we built a roadmap that was very meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts first. So we really came out with creating this AI flywheel of where do we know organizations have trouble right now? And part of that is knowledge management, because as you say, you help organizations build out a larger knowledge management portfolio. It also means that kind of creates an implicit debt or something that they have to pay down, because now they have a larger portfolio of knowledge management that they have to keep up to date, that they have to keep accurate and actionable. So then we made it easier for people to create new knowledge articles and then update those knowledge articles to keep them relevant and up to date, and then leverage those in meaningful ways automatically through suggestions, recommendations, and summarizations. So we really tried to create not just splashy features, but features that fit together into this flywheel where it becomes really easy for an organization to then say, okay, knowledge management used to be one of the areas that we struggled, and as well, employee turnover seems to be getting faster and faster. My parents' generation of, you work for 35 years at the same company and you get a gold watch at the end doesn't seem to be the norm today. So how do we help people with that knowledge management side? And then the other one is really just letting the data drive us. So we were looking at 20% of new requests into service management platforms tend to not be classified. So they just come in with an other category. That leads to immediate manual triaging going back and forth with the customer, which lowers the end user productivity as well as the specialist productivity. So we just let the numbers and the statistics show us, here's the biggest bites we can take to make an impact. And as well, if we can measure that impact, then that means that the CIOs and CTOs who are looking for us to help them can immediately kind of show that to their CFO in the same way that our CFO is telling us, let's look at margins. What are you doing? What could you be doing more? It really creates this easy to tell story that isn't AI black magic. It really is, here's how we've changed performance. And part of that is making the dashboards a little bit more consumable. So it's really easy to share that on a quarterly basis without spending time in Excel or other Power BI, making that immediately accessible. So you get called into a meeting with 5 minutes notice. You can still present, here's what we're doing, instead of taking a week ahead of time with a decision scientist, data scientist.
Dan, I know that in previous conversations, you've had a question around confidence, haven't you? Particularly in relation to things like summarization or categorization. So I don't know, Scott, whether what's your sort of take on that? Because, one of the things I guess that, you and all the others out there that use this sort of technology will rely on is that the consumer or the agent is sitting there and goes, I am going to accept this summary of a long, email trail, or I'm going to accept that this resolution that's come up from, a knowledge article is right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think like, again, I'm a nerd. So I think in terms of kind of nerd type things. So I think in terms of necessary and sufficiency. So like kind of what is a hard filter to get into the game, and then how can you kind of optimize to value? And so those filters we absolutely need to meet, which are trust, security, privacy. I'm not going to create a massive liability for someone. So that's kind of entry points to the game, table stakes. You cannot move forward without those things. And then how do you start ramping up? So that's just to get in. And then how do you grow trust? Well, I think that's the same as any new executive comes into the company. I mean, I'm relatively new. I come into For Me that has a strong team that's been performing very strongly together. How do I gain their trust? Well, I show that I have an understanding of their business. I show that I'm capable of creating meaningful extensions. I make suggestions. I make recommendations. Then I take action, and I show that I'm actually creating meaningful action. And then after that point in time, the management team can trust me to kind of do things where instead of them approving what I'm doing, they're more auditing and looking for routine updates. That's that maturity curve that I think is universal. I don't think that's just for new executives joining a company or new individual contributors joining a company. I think we see that same thing with AI. So if you look at the roadmap we've had, it's summarizations, recommendations, suggestions, things that are easily auditable so that confidence can be grown. And then we start looking at, providing limited agency. So saying we're going to automatically, a new request comes in with category other. Well, let's do some lookalike search and matching to say that looks like something previous, and it routes that to an appropriate team, and that team can accept or reject our recommendations. So one, from a flywheel standpoint, we automatically get smarter. And two, we're starting to move up that maturity curve to the AI is actually taking work off your plate. And then I think the third area that we're kind of stepping into next is this area of creating AI first experiences. So most of those are saying the platform exists for human beings, and we're layering AI on top of this human experience. But obviously, as I mentioned before, AI competing with humans is not that smart today. So how can we start to skew some workflows that are really optimized for AI to not then kind of be shoehorned into this human first experience? And so we're seeing that with things like virtual agents, chatbots, and AI service desk. All of those things are starting to say, well, let's build a UI that isn't just optimized for humans, but starts to layer in those components. So that's kind of the maturity curve approach that we're taking to help grow trust, grow all of that with the strong underpinning of course, must be secure, must have privacy, must not violate GDPR, to make an obvious example.
So just on that point then, where, here's a summarization. The AI is new to the company. Let's pretend it's a new employee for all intents and purposes, and it's still learning the ropes. So there's a summary, it gets vetted by a human. They say, yeah, we like that summary, that looks good, so I'm going to accept that. I presume then there's some sort of reinforcement that feeds back into the mechanism that says, okay, this was successful, so I'm going to now seek similar in the future. And then similarly, when we say, no, we don't like this summary for whatever reason, we reject it or have to amend it, again, that gets fed back into the AI, so that over time it becomes better and more accurate and so forth, right? So that's a question. And then kind of following on from that, what would you see as, with your background and things, the kind of timeline for the confidence level to hit, let's say 90% plus of the time? Yep, summary's good, the resolution notes are good, what you've pulled from the company database here in terms of knowledge and so on is all, as it should be. What are we talking, 3 months, a month, a couple of weeks, 6 months? What's kind of or does it vary?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me know if I go too in the weeds. So if you start falling asleep, let me know so I don't have everyone else listening fall asleep too.
Just throw some acronyms at us, Scott.
So here's how I approach the problem, and I think it's really an elegant solution, which is even just 2-3 years ago, the way that we'd solve a lot of the problems you mentioned, Daniel, is we'd train custom classifiers. So a state of the art just 2-3 years ago was BERT models. They were kind of the highest performing, and we build these kind of classifiers that say, I can make predictions based off of your historical inputs, and we need to train models. So you grow this supervised machine learning training set, and from that training set, you can make forward-looking inferences. The problem with that is what you mentioned is cold start. So one is if you start with no data, so you're new to For Me, you don't have any data, we say it'll take 3-6 months, whatever. And the other problem with that is a lot of organizations have a tendency to say, I don't want you training custom models off of my data out of the gates, because that requires me to get, where is that data stored? What's the residency? All of those things, which is why to get to that high fidelity models that are custom tuned to your organization, we did retrieval augmented generation and retrieval augmented understanding, which again, if you start falling asleep, stop me here. But that's kind of the state of the art in large language models, is large language models don't understand, they weren't trained on anything related to your business. But if you feed in the prompt information relevant to your business, they can answer that question. So that's the way that we move forward with being able to say we don't have to train models on your data while we can still have high fidelity. So that's one of the ways that we kind of move away from the first part of your question of how do we not have to train models, but it still has a cold start problem because again, retrieval augmented generation is largely leveraging search mechanisms. So I'll give you an example of how we solve the cold start in one specific area, which is we have this request classifier that we've been talking about a little bit. It's just an example of one of the places that we have a tool like this. And one of the things is, how can I detect where to route a request if you haven't had any prior examples? Well, that's where some of the ways we can start to look at that is by, instead of searching for specifically like, here's a prior example, could we just look at the same way a human would probably do it? What service does this route to? Well, someone says, my email, I can't access my email, and you have an email service. Like, you don't need a prior example of that to know that's probably relatively relevant. And can we get that at least to the right team? So we kind of look at hierarchies of success and failure. So just a rough metric, and we might evolve over time, is to say that we're looking for 85% accuracy or higher for any of these automated classifications. But obviously, as I mentioned before, service instances might be a pretty high bar, especially if we have relatively limited training examples. So if we can't get to that, maybe a fallback metric that we measure to is, can we get it to the right team? And that's normally at that service level. So that's one of the places that we look at, is not just some arbitrary kind of nerd metric of 85%, but how does that fit within your workflow? And the workflow is probably, if I get it to the right team, it doesn't have to be rerouted. And what's costly from an experience standpoint, and as well, kind of just wasting people's time, is the right team triaging that ticket. So that's where we have to have a lot of alignment between our AI teams and our product management teams to make sure that, I've seen this happen in so many organizations, is machine learning engineers and data scientists take over the optimizations, and they end up optimizing for something that is similar to the business problem, but not actually the business problem.
You're in quite a powerful position, aren't you, Scott? Because on the and congratulations, soon to be world dominating. But what I mean is, you have the ability, right, to see all of the aggregated ticket data, right? Not the customer sort of content piece, but so you're not looking at one customer organization who are processing 2,000 tickets a month, 24,000 tickets a year, right? You're looking at, I don't know how many tickets that pass through the, aggregated for me system on a month by month basis. So actually your data set for making assessments are around accuracy, right? And being able to validate these sorts of approaches that you've talked about, right? You should be able to identify quite quickly, right? Is this approach working? Is it not working? Are we hitting 85%? Are we not hitting 85%? Because you've got that throughput. Is that correct? I mean, am I understanding that in the right way?
Largely correct. Here's the caveat I will give, because For Me is not a startup and we have many enterprise customers, I can't actually look at any customer data. So yes, I can test my inferences across a very large pool of customers to see how it's performing. But in terms of looking at the data to get a feel for the data, that is purposely opaque to me and my team. So yes, you're absolutely right. It gives us the ability to validate in a much larger pool, which is like the opposite of a startup. A startup, which is the world I'm in, I sold my previous company. You really have your hands deep in the customer data, and that's where you get your intuition. And it's really powerful, but it can also lead to you kind of hyper optimizing in specific market verticals or even just organizational constructs. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing though with these request classifiers, is we can run our inferences and basically play a game of saying, can we take all historical requests that came in with the category other and see how we would have performed kind of with a time machine type approach? So yeah, I mean, I can say on 10,000, 20,000 records, what's the accuracy, and kind of really walk that in and have a very high bar for when we go move this into production. We don't expect to roll that back because we've tested it across thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of records.
Yeah. So, and that brings me, I think, really nicely onto the next question. So let's just role play, right? I'm a potential customer here. I'm saying, Scott, I'm interested in subscribing to the For Me platform. What should I be expecting in terms of improvements, and to what degree does For Me or the partner community, I mean, obviously we're one of your partners, but maybe we should answer this, but I'll ask you in the first instance, what does For Me or the partner community need to do to kind of help the customer achieve those outcomes? Is there something that customers need to be thinking about here, or is it just turn up on day one and like, wait, I'm away, I'm 20% more efficient or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And we see this a lot, kind of to take it back to the buying process of 100% of CIOs and CTOs know that they need an automation, not just story, but they need an automation outcome. Yeah. So I think at the highest levels of who's leveraging the software, that's part of the reason they come to For Me, is they see that we have all of these tools available to form a solution. So that's kind of the way I look, is we have tools, those tools present themselves, like I talked about, in that flywheel that actually creates solutions that are meaningful. But one of the things that's super helpful from a partner standpoint is the implementation teams are often focused on how do I get enough in place that I can hit the ground running and start? And a lot of times there is that disconnect between the executive knows that they need to optimize for the automation strategy, and the team is like, here's what we currently have today. How do I at least get to parity with that? So that's the main thing we see is kind of how does the software itself help escalate people up that maturity curve? Because I understand if you're a line manager within an IT or service management regime, like the first thing you need to do is it's stressful enough to switch platforms. So one for me tries to make it as easy as possible to do that. But as well, how do we make it so that you don't have to get all of that done within the initial implementation, or you won't ever be able to adopt these things? And I think that's kind of the power of For Me is For Me makes it really easy to, whether you've been using For Me for 14 years and didn't even know that AI existed until yesterday, great, you can get started, or you're getting implemented today. Your ability to execute your way up that maturity curve is largely the same because the way that For Me is constructed to allow for configurations within the existing infrastructure, instead of allowing you over time to create such a niche infrastructure to deliver your needs, that all of a sudden these additions on top of the platform are unavailable to you.
Yeah, so this is I think, and I'm not totally technical, so feel free to shoot me down, but I think this comes back to the fact that the data model in For Me is kind of sacrosanct, isn't it? Right. So when you're leveraging on additional capability, you know exactly what the platform is, the foundation is that you are building those capabilities on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we allow for a lot of customization without kind of changing the configurations.
Yeah.
So, and that's the same thing that also makes it easier to integrate across multiple trust relationships so that you can work with a partner. Is there isn't this kind of your silo talks to my silo. No. There shouldn't be these silos. And again, going back to kind of why I was so excited and joining For Me is that just makes it one step easier, because normally job number one is kind of you get your company acquired. They tell you to build out the AI team, and you start looking at it and you're like, before I build an AI team, I have to build a data platform team. Before I build a data platform team, I have to build a data governance function. And the thing that you're really good at, which is building AI, you spend 10% of your time on, you spend 90% on data governance, which is more of an enterprise type thing. So yeah, it really comes down to that. And that's where I think also it comes down to the goals, like I said, right now are not universal. Different organizations have different models of how they expect to see that. And that's where I think the partners are so valuable in understanding, here's where an organization's at, here's where they expect to see the biggest bang, and let's pursue that. We don't have a universal playbook where it's like For Me's best practices, take them or leave them. No. The solution is configurable enough that we can optimize for whatever you're looking to do. But oftentimes the person who best knows how to map those business goals to our technology solution is at the partner level.
Yeah, that's good. So I've just got one more question, Dan. I don't know if you've got anything that you want to ask.
No, you shoot, Sunil. You shoot.
So this is the kind of blue sky thinking, question, right? So, we've talked about lots of amazing work that's going on today, but yet, as we started this conversation, we sort of talked about, the kind of hype, right? So, Scott, will we get to the hype? What will we see in maybe 3 or 5 years? Are there going to be a swathe of service desk agents looking for work as fruit pickers, or what's going to happen?
I think what we'll see is that mechanical tasks will be automated. So things that really are just kind of going through the operational motions, those will be pretty purely automated. But I think you're going to see the existing cohort of people within the space will actually have to up level and fulfill a different role. So they'll really need to find out how do you manage this large process? I mean, one of the things I pretty routinely think about is my wife was in operations and logistics. So she ran like at the Port of LA, a large group. So it's funny to me that she had like 6,500 longshoremen reporting into her. And then she's like, how do you have like 6 to 8 people and you're a vice president? And I had 6,500 people. But I think it's also that job was largely structured. Those people knew how to operate cranes and all of these abstractions existed. So it was easier to manage. I think that's what we'll see, is that the existing people within the service the ITSM and service management space will have to find a way to kind of on the fly, human in the loop, reinforce how this AI is working. Because again, most of that is kind of historically looking today. It's here's how we solved something before, here's how we solve it moving forward. But I think we're going to see transformation that says, how does AI help us look forward? Like, how do we use this to make the changes in the business where, let's just say, the CEO says, we want to change the way that our services operate, and we want that to happen. How does the AI help a CIO or CTO make that change within the organization and not have the AI catch up, but the AI works collaboratively with the team to deliver those solutions? So the main thing I would give on that blue sky is it's going to be a collaborative ecosystem. I mean, we're looking at ourselves as we're both apex predators kind of in the same ecosystem. But I think we've already seen from that hype versus is it going to make meaningful impact, we're actually kind of both in an ecosystem where we have to coexist. And if we compete, that's an inefficiency that other organizations that's found a way to work together nicer won't have. So that's where I really do believe it's going to be, and it's going to be a challenge for CIOs and CTOs. And, you talk about 3 to 5 years, it's a challenge today.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting point, Scott, because, it's something I've thought about as well, right? But at this point in time, and back to the kind of what we talked about, the topic around, building the confidence in the tool, and that's about, fundamentally it's about the data that the AI is drawing from. So in my mind, as everything evolves, technologies go up a version level, companies change tack or take on new services and things, somebody then needs to input that information somewhere so that the service desk at that first line point, be it AI or be it humans or a combination of the both, can still fulfill requests and needs and wants and so on. So I just see it as the human element of it's going to be still feeding in fresh new information that the AI can go and learn from to continue doing the tasks. I see that kind of symbiotic relationship. I mean, I don't know if you were going to share a thought on that. I'm conscious of the time as well, guys, so maybe we can perhaps have that as the closing commentary. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because I think the thing that we've seen, even when it comes to the first kind of iterations of AI, is you call into a phone line and it helps you solve something. And everyone at first was pressing opt out, like, I want to talk to an agent, talk to an agent, talk to an agent. And now you see people sometimes get frustrated with an agent because, like, just solve my problem. I don't need to tell you my life story to solve my problem, solve my problem. So I think the escalations are really where that's going to be important. If you think that something's gone wrong and you need a human to help you understand it, that's going to be the most powerful part of that human element is helping you unpack that. And I think that's where it all comes down to, is the AI gets better at not just understanding and making recommendations, but actually being able to automatically solve your problem within a 10-second chat instead of calling in and having the phone just ring for 10 seconds. Like, that's going to be largely adopted and warmly adopted. But I think people are going to want that way to, if it doesn't solve their problem within 10 seconds, and it's clear that it probably won't, to have someone who isn't acting like a robot. And I think that was the problem with those humans that were kind of facilitating that, is they were acting with very little agency. So I think we will see, kind of people who are, when you finally get in touch with a person, they'll be empowered to make decisions that drive forward beyond that. And I think that's the main thing is, as we free up people to spend less time on the mundane kind of operational details, I think just organically we'll see them kind of up level to say, when you're talking to a human, this human will have more empathy, they'll have better understanding to generalize, and they'll be able to escalate. And that's where, I mean, that to me is not the goal to say, the next layer is how do I create a more empathetic virtual agent? No, it's to solve more problems and to not, the goal is not to replace people. It's to create better profit margins, more efficiency, better customer experience, and all those things, not to replace humans.
So Scott, one of the benefits that you're describing here is that no longer will we have a person that tells you the computer says no. In fact, the computer will tell you no, right? And then you can go and talk to a person who might say yes.
Yes, or here's how an equivalent yes. But yeah, absolutely. That's what we've seen. And I think that's where most people got frustrated, was when it moved from, actually it's cheaper to have a human read a script that's computer generated. Like, that's not
Yeah.
generating the value that humans can bring to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think we wrap up on that note.
Yeah, let's wrap up on that point. Scott, fantastic to have you join us. Really appreciate your insights and sharing your time with us. To the audience who's listening, thank you very much. Hope you found this insightful. Please get in touch if you'd like to find out more.
Yeah. Scott, thank you ever so much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. Great. Look forward to seeing you guys again in person soon.
Likewise.
Thanks.